support the override for the Pine Grove School. I think that it would be too much of an opportunity for the town to turn down a 50% reimbursement from the state, and I hope that it does pass. I am also going to support the override for the police and fire station. So I've been informed that you don't have good numbers for me later on tonight. Thank you very much.
Could he identify himself?
Yeah. I'm sorry. I apologize. Joe Perry, Board of Selectmen, Town of Raleigh.
Thank you. I am going to insert a chairperson's comments section into the agenda. 2 items. Number one, we need to come up with some dates for our 3 goals that we had, completion dates, at least tentative completion dates, and that would be the superintendent evaluation document, the school committee self-evaluation document, and the review of the regional agreement. So I don't know if anybody wants to kind of give a little bit of a touching base of that, just to tell us when you think maybe we could have that done.
PNN has been working on the superintendent evaluation, and we're continuing to work on it. However, meetings with the PEC have kind of taken priority. We actually kind of view this as a more ongoing thing. We've kind of changed our focus a little bit. I don't know. What do you think, Mr. Farmer? Sorry, as you're doing inopportune time. At one point we thought maybe this was going to continue into next year. I think so.
You've made a lot of progress, but I do think it should be sorted out before the end of this year, so that the new superintendent knows exactly where he is as you go into next year. So my expectation is that certainly by the end of April, we'll have got the budget through by mid-March. We should be able to wrap that up. I don't know whether, Brian, you're part of this.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. Yeah.
Robin?
The Finance Subcommittee has begun work on reviewing the regional agreement. We have added an additional meeting each month so that we can tackle just that. And the goal is a 2-year goal that we, by the end of this year, the school committee has reviewed it, and then next year it will be brought into the district communications committee so that the towns can review our proposed amendments. So I feel good at this point that our work is underway, and I have no reason to think we won't complete what we set out to do on our part by the end of the school year.
Linda?
The policy committee has everything that they need to go over and change whatever they feel needs to be changed. So I feel by the end of the school year that we would have ours done as well.
Good. Didn't mean to spring anything on you, just kind of wanted to get an update, have some idea. Next item that I'm going to include at this point is regarding an appointment, and I think, I'm not sure.
I will introduce it,
okay.
And I will ask Brian to introduce the young lady that we are recommending. You received a letter of resignation from your existing treasurer. It is your appointment. Brian has had feelers out looking for the right person who could come in and hit the ground running, somebody with appropriate background and experience, recognizing that this is a kind of 1 day a week position. He has identified somebody that he's recommended to me. I have met the young lady. I say young lady advisedly. It makes me feel rather old when treasurers look young. But I think we have a person who we can recommend with confidence, and I'll ask Brian to introduce Amy.
So as Christopher said, this has been a process along the way, and at the meeting on the 23rd, you approved the concept of moving forward with an interim treasurer rather than searching for a permanent treasurer right away. The purpose of that is twofold. One, I think anytime you have a changeover in a position like this, it's a good opportunity to bring someone in with some outside eyes, take a look at the process, take a look at what we do and how we do it, and not perform an official audit, but use the opportunity to say, what could we be doing better? So as Christopher mentioned, Amy Posick she is a CPA. You have her resume there on the second page. She has worked in accounting firms previously, and then more recently she moved into the public sector. Was the district accountant at Pentucket Regional School District, and then became the business manager for 2 years before leaving to have children, and is now slowly wanting to get back into the field, and the treasurer is a great way to do that because it's obviously not a full-time job. Full disclosure, Amy was the business manager when we poached Lucinda Ward, our food services director, from Pentucket. So that was the first hurdle we had to get over. But she has forgiven me for that. So at this point, it became an opportunity for me to meet with Amy, and then again, to confuse things, our current treasurer's name is Amy. So we have met together, the Amy's and I, and put together a plan as far as a transition. Our proposal is that Amy Posick would begin effective February, the month of February. It would be the same $20,000 a year salary, prorated for the remaining months, and transition the current treasurer, Amy Jefferson, out by March, so that they would work in tandem throughout the month of February, make sure that there is nothing dropped. Obviously, when you're dealing with $45 to $50 million in receipts, we don't want to have anything fall through the cracks. So that would provide the transition. It would provide just that 1 month of overlap, again, 1 day a week. And then as of March, even though Amy submitted her 90-day notice per contract, we had said if there's an opportunity for you to transition out earlier, that was her desire. So that would allow the transition to be completed by March. So all of March, April, May, and June would be with Amy Posick as the treasurer. Again, that prorated $20,000 salary. And then recommending, because she comes in with this level of expertise, as there are things, for example, as I mentioned here, the student activity accounts. It's one of those items that is by law not governed by me and the committee. It's actually the principal is the custodian on behalf of students, and it goes through the check account at the schools, and there's a lot of gray area there, and there's been a lot of changes. So taking a look at that process, and if there was an extra project or something that we needed some work on to bring us into alignment, I would propose that we also appoint her, that if there are any special projects that we would approve in addition to, that we would contract with her at $100 an hour if they fell outside the scope of the Treasury. So that is the recommendation at this point, and she is ready, willing, and able.
I'm going to ask for motion, and then we will have some discussion. So could we have a motion to appoint Amy Posick as the interim treasurer beginning February through the end of June?
So moved.
We'll say February 3rd. That's the
February
appointment
3rd.
right now. Yep.
Could we have a second, please?
A second.
Is there any discussion? All those in favor? Unanimous?
Thank you.
Next item on the agenda is the consent agenda, which in this case is just one item. Could we have a motion to approve the minutes of the special school committee meeting held on January 23rd, 2016?
I'll make a motion.
Is there a second?
I'll second the motion.
Any discussion on the minutes? All those in favor? Thank you, unanimous. Moving along to reports and deliberations. First item on the agenda is to receive a report on the structure of the bid arrangements for the stadium.
This is Brian's wheelhouse, and I'll ask him to report.
You have in your packet, it's a two-page, probably a two-sided paper. It says Gale in the top left. This is a very simple summary of the bid specifications as we are advertising them. There haven't been considerable changes since the last time we met. We had extensive discussions, the stadium committee, working with Gale to identify, we talked about the fact that the original estimates were around 4 million, and with the recent costs and contingencies, it ballooned to over 4.5. The approval through the towns is at 4, so we have to make sure that we can do a project that comes in under the $4 million mark. So just to outline the way the bid specifications work, for a project of this magnitude, the cleanest way to do this, because again, if you do too many alts, you create confusion, you create bid contesting, and it can get...
Does everybody know what an alt is?
Doing an alternate, so a bid alternative. So rather than, so options if the overall project is too costly. So the way it's structured is the base bid includes everything we want, and then you use the bid alts to say, okay, if we can't afford the entirety of the project as we desired, then the alt 1, if you can see on the second page, is to change the structure of the turf. Alt 2 is the lift and the press box. Alt 3 is pulling out the bleachers. So just to walk you through this, the alts changed. We had talked about amending the building, different building options. Could we chop the building in half and do just restrooms? The reality is when you start talking through that process, we start talking about tens and twenties thousands of dollars to re-engineer alternatives. So the decision that we made as a group was to say, okay, let's put it out there. We have to have alts that would allow us to at least do the project, and then we make decisions. So let me just walk you quickly through where we landed as far as the specifications. Obviously, this is a 2-page summary. The front end cover letter of this bid is an 89-page specification that has nothing to do with the technical. That's all beyond that. That's just the legal contract. So that's being reviewed by our attorneys at this point. But just to summarize, as far as the synthetic turf field, we are putting it out as a 2-inch pile with the crumb rubber and sand mix, and it includes the Brock pad, which again we talked about. It's a shorter pile. It's a surface that, in speaking with folks, is more desirable, and it has this pad that provides more than twice the safety for shock for both your body, for your feet, and for your head. So the base bid includes that with the pad, and again, it includes that one bank logo, not at the center of field, off to the side. The same running track that we've talked about. It's an 8-lane straight, 6-lane oval. The chain link fencing, a change here is that you can see it says project does not include 6-foot perimeter site fencing. That was one of those things as we said, okay, how can we start to trim the costs? The only real reason for the 6-foot perimeter fence is to be able to do gated events. You can see it still includes the 4-foot pedestrian fence around the track so that athletes competing aren't impeded by crowds, so the crowd control is there. If the chain link fence were an issue later on down the road, obviously that's something that could very easily be added. The striping, the football and soccer lines, white and yellow, would be quote-unquote tufted in. It would actually be colored fibers, and then we would paint for women's and men's lacrosse in field hockey. So those would be painted on as seasonal paint. The grandstand, exact same design we've talked about, 1,513 seats. That includes 16 handicap and 16 companion seats, and that does include removable stairs with an access gate at the 50-yard line, which was targeted towards the band as they're coming from the field back into the bleachers. That does include a press box with an ADA accessible lift. That lift goes to the press box, not to the filming platform, but to the press box. Athletic lighting, exactly as we planned. It's using 2 of the poles, 2 brand new poles, retrofitting all the fixtures. The long jump, triple jump, and high jump venue. Nothing more to say than that's exactly how we designed it in those areas. The discus, shot put venue, pole vault venue, again, exactly as we designed. The football goal post, that includes new posts. Safety netting. Again, the scoreboard in the base bid, we're including the base, concrete pad, all of the connections, and then 2 flagpoles with lighting. The bank would be providing, we talked about the bank, part of their increased donation, taking it from $525,000 to $600,000 was for the naming on the field, the naming on the building, and to buy a scoreboard that would just be Vikings, Triton, whatever we decide, but no other vendor. So that would be done separately from the project. That allows us to keep it outside the scope of the project and also outside that $4 million minimum since it's a donation from the bank. The retaining wall, again, there's a retaining wall all along the marsh that allows us to move that much farther into the field or out from the field. We pulled landscaping out. I believe it was a $35,000 line in there for landscaping with the contractors, Shahovitz, ELM, the various contractors that work to maintain sites across the district. We believe we can very easily work with our vendors to say, getting product at cost or even donated to get the areas in and around. So the whole project would be completed, loamed and seeded, and then we'd be able to do our own plantings as that allowed. So walkways as planned, again, landscaping pulled out, and then athletic equipment is all items we have, not included. So again, to then, that is the total base bid. So a bidder will come in and say, okay, that's the project. They have to give us a set price for that whole project. This doesn't include the amenities building. Obviously, that's a separate bid, but the amenities building is just as we designed it. I'm just realizing that that's not in the summary. It's actually going out as two bids because all of this is under 3039M, and any vertical construction is under Chapter 149. So in theory, it's probably going to be two general contractors. There are probably a handful of GCs who would be able to do both pieces. They tend to be more Metro West than this area, but ideally there would be one GC who would do it, and then obviously that makes everything cleaner. But again, as far as the deduct bids, those deduct alts, or ways to say, okay, if they come in and the price is $4.1 million, we then have the ability to say, okay, so we're going to go in order with these deducts. The key is you have to do these in order. You can't say, okay, we're going to award the bid with deduct number 3. We can do 1, we can do 1 and 2, or we can do 1, 2, and 3, or none of them. 3 is obviously very drastic. That removes the bleachers. We were struggling because we started to take out items like the landscaping, the fencing. We decided, let's take those out of the base bid. Let's not even include those in any way that would float that total package cost. Looking at the building again, we would have to spend $20,000 plus to redesign and re-engineer and add months of engineering to redesign and re-engineer the amenities building. The agreement and the decision was to move forward with these as options. The synthetic turf Alt 1 basically takes out that Brock pad and puts back a little bit more sand, a little bit more rubber, and a 2.5-inch pile. That pad is about $150,000, $160,000. So that would be significant savings. Obviously, that's offset by a little less fiber, a little less rubber, a little less sand. The press box and the hydro lift, that is more significant savings as well, to the tune of about $180,000. Again, we're talking projections. We have to wait and see what folks bid. The grandstands would be more to the tune of $400,000. So these are on paper to ensure that we can approve a project. And again, this committee has to formally vote to enter into to both award the bid and enter into each of these contracts. So ideally, things come in better. There are two things that are still working in our favor. Gail is in the process of 18 projects this spring, track and field renovations. We are the first to go out to bid. So we're the first on the street. We're early February. The second piece is we've said we would be willing to forego the spring season and not wait until after graduation. We don't have any bleachers. It's a pretty easy decision. To not wait until June 15th to start the project. So there are contractors out there who are not doing really well with snow removal this year and a lot of other things they do to make money in the winter, who are hopefully going to be very hungry for work and work that would be able to be started, we've set up on Monday, April 4th. So that would allow all of April, May, and the majority of June to have the contractors working. In Gail's estimates, that could produce significant savings. So between those two options, it's not a sure thing we're going to have to get to these alts. For me, three is extreme. And I think if we got to 3, there are ways throughout the life of the project that we could go to other donors and say, I mean, this was part of the discussion, here's a very real and tangible thing. We are not going to have we could afford everything else because of the costs. We're not going to be able to do the bleachers, and go to donors with a very specific ask. I hope we don't end up there, but we'll know soon. So this bid is, it was literally just listed in the central register today at the state level, which means it appears next Wednesday. So all of the bid specifications for both contracts, again, the one project, will be available to bidders next Wednesday, February 10th. We would do a walkthrough with any interested bidders on-site live the Tuesday of February break. We'll be out there. So I believe that's the 16th. And then at this point, we would be opening bids on Tuesday, I believe it's Tuesday the 2nd of March, if I'm not messing that date up. So at that point, does that not sound right?
Tuesday's
It's a Wednesday.
Yeah, it's Wednesday.
Okay, so then it's either the Tuesday or the Wednesday in the afternoon that we would be opening the bids. Again, with an April 4th construction start date, we're working with First Southwest as far as the borrowing to make sure that we're ready for that. And we would then have to likely schedule some meetings, because this, again, is all contingent on you as a committee making those approvals.
Any questions for Brian? Robin? Gopal?
Right, I just have a concern about the removal of that Brock pad. Is there any likelihood of an increase in injuries, concussions, et cetera?
If you look at the research, there's a GMAX test, which I guess is your body, the HIC, which is your head injury compaction, and then a foot compression, which is about your general body. Using the Brock pad increases or decreases the impact by close to 70% on a lot of those ratings. All of the fields have to comply within a specific requirement. It can't be any greater than. With the pad, it's generally, the number is 145, I believe, is the GMAX rating. This puts it generally more in line with natural grass. You wouldn't think that natural grass is the best, but a high-quality natural turf field is the best. The issue is the maintenance of it is significant. So the GMAX testing and the HIC testing with the pad is below 100, moving towards those ratings for a natural turf field. Again, and we're talking like Pebble Beach turf. So is it, I can't blanketly say it will increase injuries, but it certainly is a much safer playing surface with it. Absolutely.
And just one follow-up, Brian. When you say the bid has already been put out, are these 3 items in this order out as in that order as well, or is this something that we decide?
We could actually change those. Yep, we could. So the information that's out there right now is a posting in the state listing so that it becomes live next Wednesday.
Robin?
So just to be clear, we are going forward to build that amenities building with those permanent bathrooms, even if we had to get to 3 where we have no grandstands, which is what actually requires them to be there.
Yes.
You mentioned briefly at one point to me about possible prefab bathrooms versus the engineering of cutting the building in half or anything. Would it be expensive to completely remove the amenities building and just go forward with some kind of a prefab? Can you just talk about that a little?
Yeah, obviously anything prefab is going to be cheaper in the engineering of the structure, but it's the engineering of the entire underlayment, the drainage, the connections, the electrical. So they designed this with the electrical for the entire stadium enclosure housed in that amenities building. So they're talking connections all in through there. So the entire electrical design needs to be redone. The entire drainage design needs to be done. The plumbing design. So Would it be cheaper? Yes. Cheap? No. I mean, we were, should have brought that folder, but
100,000 less.
even less. I mean, we were talking about $317 per square foot versus the mid to upper 275 per square foot, I believe was the number, to do prefab versus to do stick built. So it's, there would be some savings, but the biggest consideration is regardless of what we would do, it would be pushing this out. So, and again, that's where we had this very discussion. Okay, so let's just hold off on the amenities building. Okay, well, we can't get an occupancy permit for those bleachers until we have the restroom. So that's where we got in this pickle to say, okay, it's hard to add the building later. The bleachers, if we were to go out and raise the money, those can be added. Again, I use the word easily, but when you're talking about nothing
Relatively
with electricity and it's footings and aluminum.
Thanks.
Narissa?
Yeah, I just had a couple questions. Do we, based on what the current market is and having put this bid together with Gale, do we have an idea from them as to where, knowing that $4 million mark is sitting there, where they currently would think we would come in with the bid versus the alts?
Again, on paper, if anything that we're going to ask now, Gale and S3, and then blanking on the third-party reviewer that we used, they wouldn't put anything on paper that's anything less than they put on paper. So as it stands now, the base bid, it would still come in and say, okay, we're at that, call it 4.56 million. Then again, it's a matter of how hungry are the contractors, and they seem to think that ability to start, everyone wants to start after June 15th. They said that's almost boilerplate. Construction can begin on or after June 15th. So that ability to keep contractors busy for 2.5 months will hopefully play in our favor.
Okay. And has there been an update on the wastewater treatment situation at all? Or
We are waiting. We are waiting. I think in regards to the timing on that, the more time goes on, the more my understanding is the technology that's available would make it less towards the 500,000 mark and more towards the 350,000 mark. We haven't been told we're going to have to. I believe in, as I've said this, I think publicly, we're going to have to do it eventually. The question is, are we going to be forced to do it now? If there's a way for us to do it now, we will be pulling a bond anticipation note or a ban, so it's a short-term borrowing throughout the course of this project, and then borrowing, issuing the full 20-year bond in concert with the towns to say what's the best cycle. So if we're going to issue this bond for the stadium, say November 1st, that means it's going to be due on a November and spring cycle. So if that works for the town, that gives us through November to deal with it, issue the bans, roll that into the same bond, and even if we have to find a way to cover that cost in our operating budget, it at least can roll into that same bond, which you're not going to get a good bond rating on a $350,000 project, but if it makes a 4.35, then you're getting that lower rate.
Okay. And just, I'm not sure, does the school have a system already to accommodate if we had to go to the loss of the press box? Is there an outdoor PA system that exists here?
Yep, this all includes the PA because the PA is actually part of the, not the press box, has the scoreboard, sorry, long day. So it's actually built into the scoreboard. Part of the discussions with the residents of Caldwell is the scoreboard isn't going to be to your left if you're in the bleachers, it's going to be to the right. And it will be facing back towards the building, away from Caldwell, which is going to greatly improve the megaphones going out over the marsh. So that's all incorporated into the scoreboard. So that would still be, all of the conduit would still come up into a location, wherever we put it. That would be eventually where we would tie in when we eventually put the press box. But for now, I mean, for the 5 football home games a year, we would rent a scissor lift that would allow them to be elevated for the filming, and everything else would be done from the bleachers.
Thank you.
Anyone else have any questions?
Is the savings for that press box, when you just mentioned scissor lift, it would still allow everything to happen. comparable to that pad? I mean, can you just explain the rationale to have the pad go away before the press box?
That's a good question. Now I really wish I had my stadium folder, although it's getting too big. Dina's, of course, Dina has it. Oh, you don't?
I don't know that I have it, but I'll look.
It's the pink tab.
The press box provides the photography platform.
I know, but the pad is a safety issue, and it's done at the time it's built. We don't
Just
get to
sharing
go back.
information. I
Yeah,
wasn't
yeah,
making an argument. Yeah.
So again, rough, and it all depends on what a bidder comes in with, but the pad, in my understanding, was about 160,000, call it. But there's probably about 80,000 worth of savings because you're going to have not 2.5 inches of pile, you have 2 inches. Rather than, whatever it is, 2 inches of sand and rubber, you're only going to put 1 inch of sand and rubber, and then you're going to have a little less underlayment. So when you're talking about a massive space, those materials are significant savings. So again, the guesses were that could float, increase the price $90,000. If I'm not mistaken, I believe the lift was 80,000 and the press box was around 60,000. I don't know if those are ringing bells. I think we're around 140,000 for the press box and the lift. Again, we wouldn't put the lift without the press box, and we can't do the press box without the lift. So it was.
That's a bigger savings than the pad. The pad only knocks 80,000 off the overall bid, but the press box and the lift knocks 150 off. Is that what you said, 90 and
Yep.
60? Or?
Yep.
But that can be added later, and the pad can't.
That's correct. And the pad, I mean, to be perfectly honest, part of the discussion is that it's not, I was speaking with someone, I made it sound way too simple, but if we learned 10 years from now that crumb rubber isn't safe and decided, okay, we need to go EnviroFill, in order to use any of those fills, you have to have a pad. So if we have the pad in place with a 30-year warranty on it, I said it's simple as, you vacuum out the old and you put in the new. It's more complicated than that. But to have the pad under there, we've already done a part of that process, should we in the future decide we need to. So, earlier today?
Yeah, this meeting.
Right, but it's only 80 on the total offset, because it's the.
Sorry about this.
No, that's fine.
Officials are not supposed to whisper.
I'm just,
Talk
so,
into the.
I think,
Talking about the costings.
I think what Robin is saying is that the pad should be more of a priority.
Than the press
Yeah,
box.
if I were going to go to that first alt, I'd flip 1 and 2.
Okay.
Unless you have a
I mean, I'm trying to remember the discussion with the entire group, and obviously, it's a big help, especially for the football program, to have the press box, to have the elevated videoing platform. But I think if we're talking about a safety feature versus something like you said that can be added later, and again, the press box is a component of the bleachers that can be engineered to be ready for it in the lift as well, and we could do all of the rest of the bid includes, all of the ground prep that would be ready to receive the lift as well. So, I don't know, Dina, what you were going to say?
I was just going to say that I believe Sean McGinnis had said that it's beneficial to have that, although they could use a temporary one, but to have it for scouting and filming and all of that as well. I'm trying to see in my notes if we noted why we put that first. I'm having
Because when you
problems
said
finding
you
it.
could rent the temporary thing, that changed it pretty quickly in my mind versus not having it at all. I mean, there's going to be some added cost to rent that, but
Absolutely.
not that we'd go without.
Right.
Well,
Brian, I just have one quick question. The notion of starting this in April versus June 15th, could you ask Yale Associates whether there's any chance that the contract price is going to go up because of the mud season or anything along those lines? Is there any chance of that?
No, it's actually because they can start as soon as the ground is clear of snow. They're happy. I mean, they're removing, I believe it's 1.5 feet of earth. Was it 100 and 290
Something
cubic,
like that.
100 cubic yards. I mean, it's something like 220 truckloads of earth that are going to be moving out of here. So they're digging down, frost line and below. So my understanding is it's always been beneficial to do it early, always.
Brian, in my notes, I had noted that we put the turf first because there was some concern about not being able to specify the Brock pad.
Okay.
Remember that conversation where Sean said that we really couldn't do that, but I think since then, we might have better information that says we might be able to put
Yeah.
specific requirements in there. So I
That's-
believe that's what I had noted. That's the reason why we had turf first.
Just for clarification, that Sean is not our athletic director.
Yes. So that's Sean Boyd.
Oh, Sean Boyd,
Sean
yes,
Boyd.
sorry.
So just to clarify what Dina is saying, we technically need to put an open bid. We need anything we say as far as specifications, it has to be able to be met by at least three vendors. You can't have if you don't, it's called a proprietary specification. And in order to have a proprietary specification, we, the awarding authority, have to have a very good reason why we're saying this is the vendor we want. So for us, we said Brock pad or its equivalent, and then in the specifications it talks about HIC scores and GMAX scores. I mean, it's the only one that's certified cradle to grave, so it's literally, there's nothing that's not recyclable in 25 years. If you're done, they come back and take it out and recycle the entire thing. So we're not going to go crazy with that, but put enough specs so that we basically say we want the Brock Power Base YSR, and there's no other competitor, I believe, I forget the name of the one in Newburyport, significantly less costly, but it's also a very different product as far as impact and safety concerns.
Full disclosure in terms of the pile height, without the Brock pad, it's not as good a surface for field hockey.
I would like you to help me here. I thought that you said that the alt bids would have to be taken in that order.
Yes.
Okay. So, but then a few minutes ago you said we could change.
Tonight.
We could change this order listed. Once it's out there, so it's advertised in today's, which is just literally bids will be available as of next
Oh, so we
Wednesday.
would need to change it before next Wednesday.
All those specs become public next Wednesday.
Okay.
Yeah. So yes, I would say tonight would be the last formal opportunity to make that change.
So Brian, if we can specify or make the specs for the pad specific, as close to specific for Brock as we can, and you're fairly confident we can do that?
I am. Again, it comes down to, are we confident to say that we are making it a proprietary spec because of a specific reason? For us to say to specify field turf versus sprint turf versus another product, are we really going to get into fibers and who makes it and all of this? It's a 2-inch fiber. But if we're talking about something that has very specific science behind it, where we can say, here's the research, this is about safety, I believe we have a strong argument.
Okay, if that's the case, then I would agree making the turf and the Brock pad number 2 and moving the press box up to number 1.
Okay.
As long as we can be fairly certain that
Yeah.
we can get the Brock pad.
Does anyone else have any input on that? Or does anyone else have a different opinion other than that? Would you like us to vote on this?
I would. Very much so.
Could we have a motion to put the press box and hydro lift as the deduct alternate number 1, as alt number 1, and change the synthetic turf to alt number 2?
So moved.
Could we have a second on that?
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor of that change? Unanimous. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay. Next item on our agenda is payroll provider to receive a report on a necessary change in our payroll provider.
I'll start this so that Brian doesn't talk all night. We have had our auditors in very recently. They very kindly gave us a heads up that our current payroll provider was a difficulty, to the extent that I think the owners are actually
In jail.
in jail at the moment. understand that their employees are leaving. And this is an organization that provides our payroll. Paying, I don't know what's going, paying people the right amount of money the right day is very, very important in terms of the organization. So Brian has been looking at alternatives, and he will now report on that.
Thank you, Christopher. So again, we've been with Harper's Payroll for, I believe it's 14 years, 13 years. They cater to the municipal, town, school districts sector. It's a no frills payroll service provider. We've been looking at other providers just because they don't have the employee self-help and human resources portals that make a lot of things like getting your W-2 again possible. So we've been looking at payroll providers for 2 years. We've looked at several others. We actually were ready to, I don't know if you remember this, but last January, a year ago, we were ready to go with a new company, and it kind of all fell apart as far as their ability to work with a municipality at the 11th hour. As Christopher said, last summer, the news broke that the owners of Harper's had been embezzling cash, something to I don't want to quote any amounts. My understanding is they are now in jail, and folks have been leaving left and right. We have stayed true. We've worked with them. We've tried hard, and our rep has been good, but informing Lee, our HR payroll coordinator, folks are leaving left and right. You're going to stick around, right? And so we've said, yep, we're good. This past Monday, Lee called and asked for her, and they said, oh, she no longer works here. So we kind of upped that a little quicker. We are actually in a track if at this point we wanted to alert you before we make this change to make a change before the end of this year. As Christopher mentioned, our auditor, Dick Kingston, said, just have a plan B. It's a private company, which means tomorrow they could call you and say, the last payroll in February is the last one we can process. So we've been putting a plan B in place, and we're now ready to move forward. The silver lining is here is we used to be with ADP. Everyone knows ADP. We've looked at their solutions. We currently pay about $28,000 per year. Their solutions cost about $73,000 per year. The beautiful thing is that they have what's informally known as the Harper's discount, and so that same package is $31,000 a year now, same soup to nuts. So we would be getting an incredibly more advanced system, and for only up to $35,000 per year with all the other processing fees. So at this point, we've talked about going ahead and being ready to roll on April 1. That's where we're at as far as the processing, but wanted to make sure you're aware. You'll see that in next year's budget. It's a $28,000 line item. We're proposing in next year's budget that it's a $35,000, and I can tell you ADP will be forever motivated to keep it below that amount, because if it goes above $35,000 per year, we have to go out for bid. So anything over $35,000 has to be an IFB or an RFP. So I believe we'll be with them for many years to come, but wanted to make sure you're aware of that.
Any questions on the payroll provider change? Yes, Paul.
Who are they stealing the money from?
We have never lost a dime. The company. Never and my understanding is that's well documented. It's not from any companies whom they process for. It was the company itself. So.
Any other questions regarding the payroll change? Okay, thank you. Next item on the agenda is to receive reports, updates on the FY17 operating budget. And just to remind everybody out there in the audience that this is a formative meeting. This is a discussion among the school committee members and the administration. Next week, we will vote a tentative budget, and on February 24th, we will have a public hearing. And that will be the time when members of the public will be able to come and address the school committee with their thoughts on the tentative budget.
As we get into this, can I just remind everybody about what happened last year? That the tentative budget cut over 1.1 million out of the budget at that stage. That involves 6 elementary school teachers, over 4 high school teachers, and 1.8 central office administrators, amongst other things. And then, because the governor's budget was late, because he's allowed to be late in his first year, we then got the minimum contributions, which are about what the minimum that each town has to pay. And that resulted in some very considerable swings between the towns. And we then cut over 400,000 out in a second round. So getting close to 1.6 million out of the budget this year. So whatever we do this year is on top of that. And I think it's important that people realize that we think we got pretty close to the bone last year. And I think we're at the bone this year. So we've got a kind of structure here, and hopefully we can stick to it, though it'll be slightly a circuitous discussion at times. But if, Brian, you could set the scene in terms of the implication of the governor's budget.
Just by way of an overall, before I talk specific numbers, the Chapter 70 calculation as proposed by the governor includes $20 per pupil more as a minimum. It funds this ongoing discussion effort reduction. It funds effort reduction at 70%, which has further led to the swing in which towns should pay more. And one of the bigger items is the change in not the Chapter 70, but in the charter schools, in that he reworked the reimbursement formula. So he put $20 million more into charter schools, but in doing so, rather than a 5-year pay down, so the first year a student goes to a charter school, for us, River Valley, the state reimburses us 100% of the cost. The second, third, fourth, and fifth years, they reimburse us 25% of the cost. The new formula is the first year they will reimburse 100% of the cost. The second year, 50%. The third year, 25%. 4 and 5, you're on your own. With the caveat that any district that is not a district found in need by a certain threshold of a number of charter schools and underperforming, you only get the first year reimbursement. After the first year at 100%, you don't get years 2 through 5. We're in that category. We won't get years 2 through 5. So you'll see in this budget, this assumes a $65,000 increase for the charter school just based on that recalculated formula. Regional transportation was level funded. The number's actually a little bit higher, again, just based on our actual expenditures in the current year. And then they don't include the homeless transport reimbursement as part of the cherry sheet figure, so I add that into the regional revenue. And then the only other revenue that changed is for the medical. So I think as far as before we go into details, I mean, that's really the scene as far as what the budget means. Unfortunately, it means, in my guess, that we're in for one of those years where the effort reduction at 70% is going to be something people want to fight about, and the charter schools is going to certainly be an issue that people want to fight about, which means we're not going to have any concrete figures until we get to June 29th like we have in recent years.
Kindergarten.
So at this point, the kindergarten, again, we have decent intel that the governor actually funded the kindergarten grant at the exact same level of fiscal 16. However, it's being reworked. So we have yet to see real clear data on what that means, that it will be reworked. Yeah, I'm not going to speculate, other than, and you'll see in our numbers, we've assumed we're getting the grant again for next year.
Deb, can I ask a question or make a comment? I didn't speak to Deb or ask to put this on the agenda, but last Thursday night, MASC Regional Schools had a conference call with Jay Sullivan, Roger Hatch, and Christine Lynch about the governor's budget. And in my notes, I have everything that Brian just said, but there's one thing you haven't mentioned, Brian, that I want to ask you about, and that is the economically disadvantaged now that they're calling instead of low income. There was a change in that. Is that going to affect us?
To be perfectly honest, I haven't unpacked that yet.
Okay.
So again, the change is, historically, there's been an indicator in the Chapter 70 formula for free and reduced lunch. We know that our numbers have been growing. Because of the concept of direct certification, where if students are on transitional assistance, at the state level, they're automatically certified. So larger districts like Boston directly certify every student, and they don't do lunch counts. Everyone's free. So in order to implement that, the free and reduced numbers are not then a consistent number across the state to be able to compare data. So the state implemented this economically disadvantaged, which takes those state indicators if someone is getting transitional assistance, any of those programs through the state food stamps, they're automatically coded as economically disadvantaged, and that's the indicator that's used in the budget. I can tell you there's a little bit of a swing in our Chapter 70, and again, I haven't gotten that deep yet. If you take the flat $20 per pupil that we received, because again, we're in the hold harmless category, we got roughly 62,000 new Chapter 70. In that, there's an extra 10, 15,000 in there that would not be there with just the 20. So I have not dug that deep into that yet.
Okay, because that might be where it's coming from, because just so people know that it's $3,775 for the base rate,
Yep.
and then 40%, they cut it into deciles, and then depending on where you fall in that, because it's also by grade level too, it sounds really complicated, although to Roger Hatch, this is like kindergarten.
This is a Friday night for Roger Hatch.
Exactly. If nobody knows him, this man loves numbers, loves this stuff. Anyway, I'm just wondering if that's where that's coming from, and I'm hoping, once we know that information, that would be good information to have. MASC is asking for that information too, if we can get it to them. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Carry on.
Can we go on? I'd like to suggest that the paper that Brian has prepared in terms of spending and cuts really combines B and D. So what I would suggest is that we leave B for the moment and treat B as part of D, and go to a report on the meeting of the Public Employees Committee. And this should be a report. It's not a meeting in terms of negotiating strategy, but simply to receive a factual report on how that meeting went.
Want me to, or Dina, would you like to, or I'm happy to?
Well, I'll start. As we said, we've been meeting with the PEC. We met with them last week, and I told them of the school committee's charge for us. And we've just started looking at the different plans that are available. We haven't dug into anything yet. We did say that we wanted a 0%, whether that be through plan design or split or whatever. Of course, the unions will be discussing that on their own, but we did go over all of the budget issues that we're facing, and to give them a greater understanding of why we're looking at this. I did mention to them that since approximately 75% of our budget is personnel-based, and we've cut everywhere else, we are kind of stuck as to what else we can cut. Basically, that's, if either one of you want to add to that, but that's where we stand right now. We're meeting with them again tomorrow.
Well, we should just say that the day after the meeting, we did get the MIA figure, which is
5.1.
And we had 12%
Correct.
in the budget before, so that is good news.
And as you'll see in the update, that actually produces, a 0% would produce savings, because we've talked earlier this year about the fact that our enrollments this year are lower than we planned for. So even just a 0 saves us all in $680,000, I believe the figure is. The one other thing to point out is we talked about some data in regards to the share that the charge from the committee was to talk about both the share and the plan design. I did a quick survey and got 63 districts to respond, which I thought was pretty good. In regards to the shares, we are, of the 63 that responded, there are 12 who are contributing less than Triton, meaning they're a 65-35. There are a few, there's two 50-50s. Braintree is a 51-49. Actually, we know Rowley's a 51-49. There are three 60-40s, a handful of 67 point, 65 to 70. We're one of 11 at the 70-30 split. And then there are, roughly 40 more that are at 74% or higher where they're currently contributing. So as far as a comparability, we are at the lower end, if you will. Again, that's not a complete picture, but as we talked about with the committee has the ability to address plan design. I don't want to say unilaterally, but you have as a committee have the ability to push the plan design. Any split share changes have to be negotiated. So just as a scene setting statement there. But my understanding is, since we met last week and we're meeting again tomorrow morning, we had responses from the other major vendors, Tufts, Fallon, Harvard Pilgrim, and where Blue Cross Blue Shield is through Maya. And Maya was the highest except for Harvard, with the 5.1, and the others have come down some. And I've been talking to Larry through our consultant over the week, and they've come down some as well. How far they've come down, I don't know. But the savings will be realized via plan design changes at this point. So.
Can we go on?
Sure.
Brian now has a fairly complex paper that provides an update on quite a lot of the information that you've already seen about increases and decreases, together with discussion points in terms of where savings might be made as we go through building the budget.
That's fair enough.
And that's this sheet.
Yeah, so it's the landscape. So what I tried to do is put revenues at the top and then go through the expenditures. And again, this is kind of a running tally of everything we've talked about to date. And anything in red, except for the revenues, anything in red in the expenditure are items that have changed since we've last discussed them. So again, we were working from a must-do list that was approaching 2.5 million. Tried to keep bringing it back to that, but things are changing all the time. So a lot of those things that we thought were must-dos, some may have gone up, some may have not gone up, some may have gone down. But this is now the format we'll use so that you can see any change that's happened. And the second sheet of paper is the assessment samples, and we'll take a look at those after the fact. But going through the paper, starting with revenues, I basically explained this, but this hasn't changed. We talked about the fact that the current budget this year assumes $250,000 of our excess and deficiency. That brought our balance of 787 down to this year 596 and change. It's certainly my recommendation to not use another 250, being that that's almost half of our excess and deficiency, which means that we can only use 100, which it reduces our revenues by 150,000. Again, Chapter 70 increases by $62,815. Transportation, $42,930, and again, that's assumed the level funding with our increased costs, as well as me putting in $25,000 in reimbursement for our homeless transportation. And then the retiree medical for BCBS and MedX, again, that's as the costs of insurance change, that changes what employees or retirees are paying into us. So we budget the full amount of every retiree's plan at 100%, and then we budget their 70 or their 30% contribution as a general revenue. So again, all in, we're losing $44,541 in local revenues. Going into expenditures, again, the red is going to denote changes or things that have changed since we last spoke. that 967,544 is now an all-in aggregate. I started to track it and change it in all the different categories, and it's getting too complex a moving object. But that change of 967,544 includes all those bullets. All of the unions are currently have a contract in FY17, so the total cost of all lane change, column movement, steps are all included. It does include $57,736, which is a 2% COLA for anyone not in a union. Again, so that's any administrator, support staff, and all the offices and around are inclusive in that 2% or for $57,000. It does include the reworking of my contract as a superintendent, and there is a savings with the school business administrator. So those are all rolled into that cost. It includes a salary contingency of $131,000. Again, that's just over a touch of 0.5% of our total payroll. Column movement, $60,677. That's what we have to budget based on what folks have said they will be making next year by this past December. And again, we talked about the fact that our choice revenues for students choicing in is down. Not quite 195, but again, we need to be relying less on choice, and so there's 195,000 that moves back from a choice charge over to the general fund. So all of that is the 967,544. As we've gone through, we've tried to, as Christopher said, we've tried to identify areas where we can save. The first one listed here, and I tried to outline these. I first listed them by cuts and additions, and then by site, and I think it makes sense to categorize them more by kind of the changes in compensation and services. The cuts ended up because we're talking about at the district level. I put them up here with the district-wide personnel. One option is to reduce elementary math specialists. We currently have 3, one at each elementary school. The proposal would be that we have 1 that services all 3 elementary schools district-wide. We had a significant amount of discussion with the leadership team about reading specialists and reading interventionists versus the math specialists. Obviously, there's no desire to remove the math specialists, but we felt as though with 1 district specialist, that's certainly a more preferable place to reduce versus the reading specialists and the interventionists. With, again, the specialists are providing interventions as well. They're not pure. At one point, they were pure coaches. There is some coaching, but there is a significant amount of interventions they're providing. So this option would again, the 3 specialists, they all have teaching licenses, so they would bump him back into a classroom, and then we would have 1 specialist. So that $143,880, that's an assumption at this point based on what I can look at as far as a crystal ball of who would go where. All of these, any cuts we talk about are inclusive of any medical savings, because again, you save the salary less 36% for unemployment costs for the first year, and then any of the health care costs, they can COBRA, but they're paying the full cost. So any of these savings you see include the change with the health care less the cost of unemployment, which means year 2, assuming those folks become employed, year 2, then the savings grow back and you gain back the savings of the unemployment. So elementary math specialist is the first option. We talked about combining. We currently still have full-time librarians and full-time instructional technology specialists at each elementary school. I think we literally talked about every possible thing we could cut, but there was discussion about closing libraries, and certainly that's not any place we want to go. So I think the concept here is all of our elementary computer labs are connected to the library media centers. And so the theory would be that there's 1 person who is providing those services, and it would be a combination of both, utilizing the computer lab and those skills as well as the library in those skills.
Well, we should add that the librarians are licensed library media, that they are licensed to work with media. So again, that would be the reduction of 3 staff.
all of those folks, again, any one of them that would be bumping back into, at this point, it looks like there's a position that they could bump into the classrooms. And again, that includes salary with medical and unemployment offset. You can see here we were assuming an increased cost of the $43,230, which was the kindergarten grant. Now that's back to a zero. Again, because if it's paid in a grant, there's no charge to the general fund. In the last iteration, we had said, okay, there's a new charge of $43,000 to the general fund. Now I'm saying it's going back to the grant, so that's why that's a zero. We're taking out a cost. Special education, there is a student who is, right now we have a teacher and an IA who is dedicated to that student. Obviously, there's doing other things as well, but there is money that David has included in the out-of-district line, assuming that child will go. So at this point, either we can take out either the out-of-district money or the cost of a teacher and an IA. So that $80,963 is ironically very close to the cost. Both the teacher and IA and the out-of-district placement are roughly similar. So that money can be pulled out. I just gave a very funny figure.
Wasn't the 8963?
It wasn't the 80? I meant to say 80,963. I'm not sure what I said. 80,963 would be the savings there. Moving into insurance, absolutely.
I'm sorry. If the teachers, the math specialist rather, would be, you said the ones that they're classroom licensed so they could bump somebody. So my question is, if they were to bump somebody, then they wouldn't be the line, they wouldn't be the unemployment. Is that correct?
Correct. All of these calculations are based on the person who would be bumped.
Oh, the person who would be bumped.
So,
Okay,
for example,
okay.
the line for the elementary math specialists, that cuts two positions of three, and the savings is 143.
So you figured who they would bump, that's where you
Yes.
get the cost. Okay,
The special ed, or the elementary library media technology saves, it's one more person, but only $2,000 more. And part of that is the fact that if there's a retirement, we save the entirety of the salary. So if there's a position that someone can bump into where someone's retiring and they were at an $80,000 salary, there's no unemployment offset, so you're saving all of that salary. So that's why the figures don't always equate to, two people is the same amount as three folks. But it's generally someone less senior that ends up getting bumped out.
Okay. One more question about the combining of the library technology positions. The only configuration I'm really familiar with is the Salisbury configuration. And I ask, how could one person in that particular building do the library and the technology room?
So again, the concept, and again, this is 60% baked, but the concept is not that it would be one person covering both locations. It would be that one person. So again, all of these specialists provide coverage for classroom teachers now. So when a student goes to library or goes to technology, the teacher then has a planning period. So if we remove one of them, if we have art, music, PE, library, and technology, and now we're going to have art, music, PE, library, tech, we have a fourth missing. We're not saying that there's going to be a class in the library and a class in the lab with one person.
Okay.
We're saying that the teachers are, maybe one week they'll be in the library, the next week they'll be in the computer lab. And then what will happen is, we can do this now, again, when you have 5 specials, that works when you have 5 classes per grade level. We now have 3, mostly 3s and some 4 per grade level. So what will happen now is everyone would get art, music, PE, and library tech each week. And then that 5th period would be a double up of something, and that would change. Whether that rotate weekly, so you have an extra art, an extra PE, an extra, or we say every quarter, you're going to have an extra art first quarter, you're going to have an extra PE second quarter. So that was still working through the details of the schedule. It's different, And it's not the simplest thing to schedule, but working with the elementary principals, they believe they can, we've got it working on paper.
Right, thank you.
So,
For clarification.
Yeah.
on that?
absolutely.
So today, if they're getting 40 minutes of library time, and 40 minutes of a technology time, are we saying that they're only going to get one 40-minute period per week of library/technology?
Yes, except for those weeks where they would get the double up.
Okay, so they're essentially losing time overall.
Yes.
towards those subjects.
So we've had considerable discussion about the use of the technology lab as a class, and its effectiveness versus, in the ideal world, our instructional technology specialists would not be scheduled in where the classes come in, where 20 students walk in and the teacher walks out the door, to have a planning period. Ideally, the technology integration specialist is a teacher working with the classroom teachers to talk about how to integrate technology into the general curriculum. That happens at varying degrees depending on the school. But yes, it would be a reduction, absolutely. Yep.
Linda?
The math specialist, we have a new math program that's put in place. How much of the math specialist is spent helping teachers with this brand-new math program that we have?
Kim, could you pick that up?
Got
I
that
can
one.
pick that one up. A lot of the success with the implementation, in addition to the teachers' hard work, is definitely the amount of time the math specialists have put in through walking the teachers through each and every unit, looking at some of the content that's going to be taught, identifying the tricky areas, looking at assessments, looking at students' progress. So I can't say enough about what an important piece they were during this first year. Moving forward and not having a PD budget, I think there is going to be absolutely some shortcomings with not having them available. I think the one math specialist is for the district could help alleviate some of that, but I think it will be very difficult to provide the level of support that we have done this year for the teachers moving forward with just one.
Can we reasonably say that the new math program is much more user-friendly?
Yeah, I think it is more user-friendly. I think there are lessons that are built in, or at least we have a guide that helps the teachers with some of that intervention that in previous years the math specialist had to plan and execute some of those interventions, where now with this program it is built into it. But they would need a few years, like I said, to get up and going with that, which they are working towards.
I have another question. Would these math specialists, when they're bumping somebody, would they be remaining in the same building that they were a math specialist?
Not necessarily. Bumping as a structure, bumping happens as a district, as a collective bargaining association. So, I mean, we certainly, if there's an opportunity where these folks can still work within the buildings, obviously we're going to make every attempt to do that. But as a blanket rule, bumping can happen across the district where the spaces are. And again, because it goes seniority.
Well, seniority plus experience and qualifications.
Dina?
Kim, do you envision with only one math specialist for the district, would the PD that's offered be altered at all, meaning either not necessarily district-wide, but building-wide or building-specific, where the math specialist could be offering PD for those teachers? Or
So currently, the math specialist, the way we did the PD for this year, all the building-based elementary PD is run by the math specialist for
Okay.
Math in Focus. So that is definitely a concern in regards to how are we going to support this, just the second year of implementing a new math program with one PD person and a limited, if none, district level PD. So can we do it? I mean, the teachers always rise to the occasion to do the best that they can. I mean, it is what it is. I mean, it's discouraging, absolutely. So,
Question. If these teachers aren't bumped out of the district, let's say, could they continue to do the PD for the district, being the teacher who runs that particular class, that particular PD class?
so you mean the math specialist, if they were in a class, could they potentially run some PD within the building that they are? Yes, they could if we had a stipend, or I mean, because now you're going to ask them to do their job, and then,
Oh, okay.
do you know what I mean? Which is absolutely something that, you know, I'm trying to think about. Okay, if this happens, how do we support this so we don't lose some of the momentum that we have and the gains that we've made with the support that they've given, and that was definitely something that I was thinking about. And the other piece that to think about, even from my budget, is that we have a math and focus technology person who has been instrumental in bringing in the technology from math and focus into the classroom with the students to utilize. And again, we won't have money in the budget to support that position next year too. So would they, you know, could we find additional funding somewhere? Possibly. I will do my best, but no.
As we go through this, we're trying to identify ways, the least worst ways to save funds. We have absolutely no enthusiasm for these recommendations whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it has to be stated, if we're talking about a reduction like assume no loss of the quality full day K grant, that's dollars. There isn't a person attached to that. If we are talking about reducing a staffing position, there will be an impact. Unequivocally, no argument against to say that there won't be. With the amount of teachers, 12 total that we reduced last year, you'll see here, we don't have anywhere to go at the high school anymore. I mean, we will be cutting into programming and what we're able to offer if we go any deeper at the high school. So as we go through, I mean, it has to be with the understanding that this will impact, absolutely will impact delivery. And again, going back to, is math important? Obviously, but what's the word you just used?
Least worst.
The least worse, or it's
Least destructive, least.
the worser one. It's been
Write that
hours. English teachers love that. And this has been hours and hours of going around and trying to find cuts that we can do. I mean, like you said, yes, they're going to get less time in library if they're getting half and half. Absolutely. And then we find a way to make that work as best we possibly can. So continue on.
I was just going to suggest that going forward, if we could take each section rather
and
than
then ask questions.
Yeah.
That's a great idea. So as far as district-wide personnel, I think we're good there. The next section, district-wide employee benefits, insurance changes. The unemployment, again, we're talking about an $82,000 in savings because the line as it existed included all the unemployment from last year's cuts. The positive news there is we have 2 folks that are still on our rolls, which is great. So that's the reality is, unfortunately, when you're cutting, the fortunate part of cutting good people is they tend to get employed at another district. So that 82,000 in savings is because we trimmed the line back to where we're spending this year. Any of these new cuts that would potentially be made, the new unemployment cost is factored into those savings. Does that make sense? So, Essex Regional, $85,000 increase. No questions asked about that. The employee medical insurance, we were looking at, actually that should be red, I apologize. We were looking at the last meeting, I believe the number was $550 some odd thousand. That assumed a 12% increase in the rates. Again, we're at 5.1 and working back towards the 0%. 0% increase actually is 150,000 less than this year's number. So we actually save 150,000 over this year's number because we are we have a lower enrollment than we would or than we planned for this year. So that actually doesn't not only does it not make a $550,000 increase, it actually saves an additional $150,000. So again, that is a change from last time. Any questions about benefits? Moving on to district-wide operations, again, the payroll expenses, it's adding $7,000 to that line. We talked about electricity and heating fuel. We're going to aggregate those into district lines. The $22,000 is about those LED retrofits at NES, SES, and outside at this campus. Heating fuel is a factor of our rate having kicked in November, and next year we'll have a full heating season with the new rate. Any questions there? So still moving down. District-wide technology, we talked about $32,955 as a total cost for all the contracted services. That number is still the same, everything from our VMware licensing to antivirus and what have you. The next two items were items we had in a high priority line, and we're now rolling them in as must-dos. The first is replacing the phone system at PGS and SES. I'm sorry, PGS and NES. Pine Grove and Newbury Elementary each have the same phone system. It's the same phone system that was at this campus and Salisbury, just newer versions. Pine Grove's is 10, 12 years old, a little older. Newbury's is 5 or 6 years old. They're now both end of life. We cannot get parts. No joke. We're talking about Malaysia, eBay to find cards for these phone systems. Sadly, the system that was put in 6 years ago at Newbury was with different technology staff for the district, and ultimately I own that because there was a technology put in that is now end of life, and we have to replace that. Pine Grove's is a much more aging system. Newbury's has not acted up yet, so if we said we have to prioritize those, Pine Grove was down without phones for a week and a half, 2 weeks. They came back online this past Friday because, again, whenever we have a card that goes down, it's not something we can get from a vendor.
Can we say that part of the discussion around this issue since your last meeting focused on safety issues if phones are down, and that was something that played on to putting them back in here?
The next line is district-wide staff and PC. Staff and CAD lab PCs. We have the majority of staff across the district, faculty and staff, outside of the offices, or outside of central office, I should say, that are on a 2012 lease. That lease is coming due, so all those PCs are returned. New PCs are coming in. That money is accounted for in the general lease line that we have recurring. However, there's a cohort of staff that have 2011 machines that are still older and are failing, and those wouldn't be replaced. So we would have the majority of staff that would be on brand new machines, and then a group of roughly 45 faculty and staff across the district who would have older machines, as well as the CAD lab at the high school, and the CAD lab, again, computer-assisted design CAD lab at the middle school. And as we're promoting and working and finding ways to implement STEM into the curriculum, those labs are a key component of being able to use computer and technology. So that $32,000 added to that line adds to the leases and brings both of those CAD labs and every faculty and staff computer across the district onto a single lease and a unified platform. So talking through the logistics of support and the management of that, we believe it's a must do. The Chromebooks and the phone systems that we had started previous leases charging to different accounts, those are now rolled back into the general fund. That hasn't changed since we last spoke. Any questions about technology?
I have one question, Brian.
Sure.
You had said that the phone system at NES has not acted up.
Mm-mm.
If we didn't do NES's phone system next year, how would that change that $25,000 number?
Roughly half of it.
Okay.
Again, because we have the basic support now, it would be the same phone system, a voice over IP system that we have on this campus and on Salisbury. And the components that would allow our network admin to manage that are already there. It's adding those other locations to those services. Again, that's a lease cost. That's a 4-year lease. So you'd be looking more like, call it 12.5, 13,000. There might be some of that labor that would fluctuate a little bit because of economies of scale, having them do 2 projects at one versus one, and then coming back out and mobilizing for another.
Well, I think there's some savings.
Yeah.
My question is, if you do only PGS, can you salvage any of that system to be supplies rather than calling to Malaysia for them for NES if we wait a year?
My understanding is no, but I can ask that question more specifically. Yeah, NES is a newer version of the same older system. So again, NES has not begun to fail, but it's the same situation where we can't get parts when it does. So we could absolutely push that one out. I think that would be one of those items that would be met with a mixed review, because it's obviously we want to have it on the same platform for security and safety, but also I'm sure the tech group would not mind pacing those installs, because last year was a heck of a summer trying to get everything ready with both of those installs we did here in Salisbury. Any other questions about technology? So I'll make myself some notes. And I should say, I just wrote down PGS and realized anything we put into this system for the phones would not be wasted if we, with a renovated Pine Grove school. This is technology that's all network based, so there would be no wasted money. Moving on to district-wide student instruction and services, special ed contracted services to $500,000. That's an increase of $100,000. The special education summer programming increase of $25,000. The home tutoring increase to $30,000, an increase of $5,000. ELL, an increase of $25,000. Instructional materials, that Atlas mapping up $10,800. And special education transport, an increase of $82,084. In regular ed transportation of $70,350. None of those figures have changed. The only item, again, anything that does fluctuate with out-of-district costs, obviously has an impact on special education transport costs. So we still have an assumption for 4 students with out-of-district placements with transportation. So if those items change, then there would be a resulting offset there in the special ed transportation. The regular ed transportation, we talked about the fuel escalator, de-escalator clause last time. Again, the projection is we would save about $14,000 for this year. We can assume that, we can take it off. I don't think fuel prices are going to change, but that would be adjusted at an end of year write-off if fuel costs stayed low. So if we want to think aggressively, we can certainly bring that down $14,000 as well. But just to understand, that's a risk. That's not a set in stone. Choice tuitions this year, we had budgeted $916,115. This year we're going to pay $800 and I believe it's $66,000. We're going to assume there's 18 graduates. I believe we talked about this, 18 additional graduates that would graduate this coming June. So that the savings to this year and then to next year is $152,000 in savings. And then, as I mentioned earlier, the governor's reformulation of charter adds $64,750 to our charter costs. And then special education tuitions have not adjusted. We did have a discussion last time about social workers, and there was a priority said by the committee that you wanted to look at adding a social worker specifically at Newbury and Pine Grove. Our thinking at this point is we are still, that $266,188 is for that small cohort of students, mostly 3rd and 5th graders. Our thinking at this point, our hope, is that we can build a program at Pine Grove that will service those students. Obviously, the second step of that is ensuring that the parents agree that that's the best placement for those students. If that's the case, then that money becomes money to build the program. We would need a teacher and we would be able to add, whether it's 1 or 2 or whatever the staffing would work out to be as far as the needs. Those students have IAs, so they would work with them in the program. So if we were to add staffing, we could save on transport, but the thinking would be to add social workers in through that program that would help support both Pine Grove and Newbury Elementary. Again, it's that population, not literally those 4 students, but it's that population of students that is drawing the most from the resources that exist at the schools. So you'll notice there isn't a proposal of adding back in any social workers, but that's the thinking at this point, that 266 would be working within that. Some of that might be one student is in and out of district placement. Some of it is about building a program. Hopefully by the time we finalize a budget on the 9th of March, we'll have a little bit clearer picture. But again, that probably won't be concrete. I don't know if you have any crystal balls, Dave, but I wouldn't assume that would be concrete by March 9th.
We'll definitely have a better idea.
Yeah. And so it's important to note too, our choice charges, if you look there, our choice charges are down to $763,000. We at one point were paying $1.8 million. So as we talk about cutting and we talk about dismantling programs, we can't lose the fact and lose sight of the fact that that number goes back up when people don't like what we're offering as a service. So that is a figure that we have, I can't say we don't have any control over. We have control over. But the choices we make as far as what we provide as services directly impact how happy people are and are willing to stay within the district. As I mentioned, don't remember which meeting it is, we have 10 students, K through 6, that are choiced out of this district now. 10. We had hundreds. So that's an incredibly powerful indicator that, of course, not everyone's happy, but that there's a positive trend, and these cuts will make an impact.
Before we go on, Brian, of those 10 lines, 5 of them are mandatory. We have no choice.
Yep. Yeah. Any other questions about that section? So over the...
When you were talking about this, the last line, the SPED out of district, and you're talking about... is the design for, the redesign for Pine Grove, is that going to take into consideration bringing those special ed kids to Pine Grove for that new program? Are they going to?
We currently would have the space as we exist now. So previously there was...
that would be...
Yep.
Okay, good.
There was Crest, which was formerly GLEC, had a program that existed at Pine Grove School. So there is a space.
So that when they do the redesign and everything, that
would be factored in. Absolutely.
Have a nice location there.
Yep.
Okay.
And just to clarify that whole process, again, assuming that was approved at town meeting for an override and we move into that feasibility and design, all of those questions get teased out as far as the programming. MSBA requires a lot of data in regards to not just their philosophy is the programming drives the building. The building does not drive the programming. So we build the case about everything we want Pine Grove to be and then design around that.
Thank you.
So over the page, at this point we have looked at elementary class reductions. I don't know if you want to walk through your paper,
You've got a spreadsheet here which has taken far more of my time than it should have. You've got a spreadsheet here that shows in the left for each school, a school proposal. Newbury was recommending 1 less class because of their numbers. We did a calculation that earlier today. This showed what happened if you took a class away at each grade level. But I think your arithmetic will be good enough to see that in many cases you get some very large classes if you reduce the number of classes from the FY17 question mark. We've got an upper limit here of 26 as a class size, It also provides you with details of the specialists who are involved in the school. In the case of Salisbury, the Title I staff. So this is suggesting taking 2 classes out of Newbury, none out of Salisbury, recognising its particular population, and 2 out of Pine Grove. The biggest classes here will be the 26 at Newbury. If we're going to make savings of the magnitude implied by the overall budget situation, then the principals think this is the last thing to do. That they would keep their class sizes if they could. So that's on the table as saving 4 teachers in total, a saving of nearly $213,000. If you have questions that you have on that particular one.
Deb, may I ask a question?
Yeah, sure.
Mr. Farmer, looking at Newbury Elementary School sizes, it looks like the increase would be in grades 4 and 5. Is that correct?
Correct.
Wouldn't it make more sense to have a 6th grade class have more students in it, since that tends to be the trend as they go into middle school and then on to high school?
The trouble is, if you divide 81 by 3, you get some pretty big class.
You go up to 27.
What we've tried to do is to protect.
27 and 6.
Right. I still would think that
Yeah.
doing that at the 6th grade level might be, it makes more sense to me.
We can certainly go back. I mean, we'll keep talking with the principals about this. But either way, it would be two teachers.
I think Pine Grove had 26 in their 6th grade.
Any,
Should we go on?
yes.
Brown?
Continuing on down, the majority of this we've talked about. There is a retirement at Newbury that would not be replaced. That was already proposed. The numbers that Christopher just went over. Currently, there are 23 classes at Newbury, and Beth had proposed 20. I'm sorry, there are 24 currently, and she's proposing 23. So there was already a reduction there. Preschool and kindergarten, we've continued to work through those numbers. Again, now I'm assuming that we'll have an offset. We talked about the total cost. If we assume at Newbury that there are 8 full tuition-paying students that register for that 5-day session that we're talking about adding a 5 afternoon, that's 3 tuitions at $3,700. So that offsets the cost. So the cost is only $23,126. The same thing at Salisbury, offset. Again, it's $1,740 for the tuition because those are 2-day sessions that we'd be adding. In the middle there for Pine Grove, we had talked about the fact that there's a sound amplification field system that we need to add. That's $2,750. That hasn't changed. Special ed IA at Salisbury. Middle school art and PE increased to full-time. That hasn't changed. The next is the foreign language becoming an elective. We had significant amount of discussion about the middle school. We've generally steered clear of the middle school for many years in the discussion because of the fact that as soon as you start removing teachers, you dismantle the team concept. There's certainly a discussion. There are other middle schools who have, Pentucket has dismantled the team structure. There's certainly a discussion to say if you have a middle school of 900 students, teams are very much more important than when you have 420 students. However, we're still not proposing dismantling the team structure. It's
Today.
I mean, again, this is information on the table. But what this does, this savings removes 2 of the 4 foreign language teachers. It pulls a foreign language out of a core requirement and makes it an elective. So students would have the option. Al is working with Catherine still on an aligned middle school, high school schedule that will give students more opportunities. I believe his last words were, "I think I can make this work." It's not fully baked. It's a concept where we've tried to identify items where, if we need to cut, where we would possibly do it. But that's the theory, that it would become foreign language would become an elective rather than a core class. There's another element of this discussion has been when we have students who we need to provide services to at the middle school, and their IEP requires that we're providing services, but the only time we can find to provide those services are when the student's in a foreign language. We can't pull them out because it's a core requirement. So if every student is getting foreign language, even if a student has a learning disability and is struggling with his or her own native English language, we can't pull them out because we have a liability issue of denying them FAPE. So that was another, again, none of this is ideal, but it was a way that provides some savings out of the middle school without removing foreign language as a whole and without removing the team structure at this point.
If I can just embroider that a little bit, if you go to Wellesley Middle School or the Andover Middle Schools, world languages are electives. They're not a core subject. I met with the high school world languages teachers, with the principal and Alan McRae after lunch today. There's concern there clearly that students won't be as prepared as they are now. But it has to be said that in an ideal world, sixth graders would be getting an introduction to world languages, more than one, and they'd be choosing a world language for 7th and 8th grade, and they would have enough under their belt when they get to the high school to go straight into Spanish 2 or French 2. That does not happen under our present arrangements. So it's not there's good things happening, some really good teaching, but our program is not strong enough to get children to Spanish 2 and French 2 in the high school. The other thing that bears on this is that recently the middle school has had great difficulty in recruiting staff. At the moment, one of our staff is unlicensed, and there's been quite a turnover. In fact, there's been turnover at the high school as well, where in one or two occasions teachers have come for a year. In one case, somebody who was an Italian speaker, but not able to do what needs to be done in high school environments. So we had quite a discussion with the high school teachers about the whole question of world language teacher supply. And they say that a lot of people that they know just take it as a minor, that they have no intention of taking it as their major subject, which would be really what they would need to go into teaching. So there's a lot of moving parts around this. I want to be clear, as I said to the high school teachers today, by the time I reached the age of 16, I got 8 years of Latin, 4 of French, and 2 of German. So I'm committed to languages, not just as languages, but in terms of culture. We're not a nation that tends to travel very, very much, and therefore to take world languages is a way of understanding that other people do things in different ways. They don't just say things in different ways, but their cultures are different. So this is put forward with a good deal of regret.
My question is, if foreign language becomes an elective, then if you don't choose to take it during that block, what's happening? What is a child doing if they're not taking French or Spanish?
We have quite a lot of students who need additional literacy support. It will be an opportunity for them to get more help, and I know that special education teachers, Kim, you may want to jump in on this, in terms of intervention.
I think for the students who need interventions, it does give them an
It's a good
opportunity.
thing.
Exactly. But I also think that with some of we could be on the same schedule with the high school, it also might open up some avenues for some of the students to take, I don't know, electives.
More advanced,
yeah,
yeah.
more advanced classes or electives at the high school. So,
But let's just say in 7th grade, if you have 2 foreign language teachers, you'd have 1 in each grade. Is that what you're thinking?
That's not clear.
No.
Oh.
One, I think more ideally, one would be Spanish, one would be French certified, and then
Okay.
it would work again with the rotating
Right,
schedule.
right.
and-
But if you had, but to keep class sizes reasonable, you couldn't handle more than 50% of the kids choosing a foreign language, and I doubt 50% need support.
Mhm.
So you'd be denying people that wanted to take a foreign language, probably.
Yes, I think, yes.
And so that's denied. So I could see an 8th grader going up to the high school for maybe some kind of tech class, or a more advanced class. But what's the likelihood that 7th graders denied a foreign language would have anywhere to go but what, a study?
No, and I think
Yeah, I
that's
was
what,
gonna say,
that's
yeah.
what Al needs to work through, is the concept of that schedule would allow electives. There really aren't electives at the middle school.
Yeah.
So whether that's developing STEM electives, or, we've proposed bringing arts, the art and PE teachers, so all of the related specials are then, the related arts are all full-time.
Yeah.
That allows for more electives. So it's the concept, and this is the challenge, I think, is finding those. You then go from 5 core blocks to 4, with an additional block that floats and rotates and is optional. So it then becomes a little bit more like, not like a high school schedule, but it's not that set schedule, but it still can work within that team structure. So
The other change that might take place is that world languages can't be taught just in a kind of a fifth of the year. You need to take it through the whole year.
Mm-hmm.
So one could imagine, not just imagine, what one could see, world languages being backed up against PE, so that instead of just having PE in one block in part of the year, they could have PE, maybe 3-4 times a week throughout the whole year, rather than it just being in part of the year.
Okay.
So we've got some work to do on this.
This question for you, Kim. Hopefully that this doesn't come to become a fact, but should it? A 7th grader who comes in and decides to take a language, shouldn't that person be required to take it through 7th and 8th grade then in middle school if we have to do this? Because I can't imagine a student coming in as 7th grade, choosing a language and then dropping it when he enters 8th grade, because that's a total waste of time. And then what does he do when he gets into high school and he has to meet those requirements for college to take language? So that's another, and I think Christopher was getting, if you're going to make this an elective, it's an elective for 2 years in middle school, not an elective for 1 year.
I think that speaks to Robin's point that anytime electives are good because a student then has options, but when there's an elective, everyone can't have that. So there would have to be a way to say, okay, if you're going to take foreign language in 7th grade, then you have a priority on that elective in your 8th grade year, or something of that.
Could I just share that philosophically, I don't think electives should be like an a la carte menu. It should be guided choice. What makes sense in terms of that choice in relation to progress in all the other subjects. I could be out on a limb there, sometimes but I believe in guided choice for students.
I'm just thinking, too, I think it's a good opportunity to expose the kids to different types of languages. So if they do take one language and they are not that happy with it, they have an opportunity to experiment. Because I think one of the other one of the other goals of having world language at the middle school is to expose them to different cultures and different language so that when they go to the high school that they have a better they have more background knowledge to say, yes, I definitely liked this language, I really connected with it, and this is where I want to pursue, as opposed to getting your freshman year and finding that out and then having to go, so many more years. I don't know, I think when you walk into one of the world languages at the middle school, it really is about exposing kids to the different languages and the opportunities that are out there for the kids. So.
Should bear in mind that the current high school graduation requirements says 2 years of world languages, but it doesn't have to be the same language. The recommendation that's going to come before you before too long says it should be 2 years of the same language.
Shall I go on? Continuing on down, supplies and materials at the middle school, we talked about that reduction. 2 IAs proposed at the high school level. Again, that's a $65,000 increase. Are there changes that could reduce that? Absolutely. Adding $1,100 to the NEASC accreditations line. We had talked about the sound field systems needed $36,000. We need half that, $18,000. And we talked about the visual and performing arts, and Catherine made a case. There was a $20,000 request. I don't have the exact figure of how many years it's been, but I believe it's been in excess of 6 years since there's been any adjustment to the visual and performing arts line, and that includes transportation costs. So any of those increased transportation costs that the VPA budget has absorbed. So we're proposing $5,000. It's not where it needs to be, but again, given the circumstances, it's a small step in the right direction. And then we talked about athletics. The coaches and the transportation are sunk expenses. So the expenditure change, is $893,879. If you net in the reduction of the revenue loss, the net impact is an increase in assessments to the towns of $938,420. So if there aren't any questions on that, and there are.
Just one. This is, I mean, every year is difficult, but this year just really seems heartbreaking because we're trying to make so many changes and do good things for our students, yet 2 steps forward, 5 steps backwards, in my view. Looking at this, it looks like we're increasing art and PE at the middle school. We're also going to be doing that at the elementary school, correct? Or we are not?
That is not proposed here.
That's out of it.
We're close to having everyone full-time there.
At the elementary school?
At the elementary level,
Okay.
yeah. This is being done primarily because it's a requirement in order to make the schedule, the aligned schedule work.
The art and PE are?
Mm-hmm. At
Even
the
if,
middle school.
to align the middle school schedule with the high school schedule, correct?
Correct.
Yes, prior to removing the foreign language concept, or prior to introducing the reduction of foreign language as a concept, that's needed in order to have, you need the full bodies here every day in order to get those rotations and provide the coverage as required.
I can explain.
Spend money to save money.
The high school has blocks A to G, and each day they drop a block.
Mm-hmm.
The middle school has one less block. So to align the schedules, we have to fit in that block G, and that's what we're working at.
Okay, never mind, that takes away my idea.
Rocket science is easier. So if there aren't any questions, let me take you to the second page, which looks somewhat.
I have that. Oh, yes, I do.
Oh. So it's a 3-page stapled packet. And let me first take you, actually, if you can flip the page and look at the enrollment sheet. Looks like this. So it says enrollment worksheet. It's got Newbury at 747, Rowley 815, Salisbury 922. If I take you to the bottom and you can compare FY17 to FY16, you can see the change in enrollments. We have Newbury down 73 students, Rowley down 42 students, and Salisbury down 28 students. I have to let you know that there's a correction to a counting methodology, whereas the data we were reporting to the department was categorized incorrectly, and they didn't notify us that it was. It doesn't change anything in regards to where we would be today. That 73, let me explain. We've got every kindergarten student. We talked about preschool used to be in the foundation. It was 2 times your special education population. Now, both kindergarten and preschool are a head count. But if you are in preschool 3 mornings a week, then you are a 0.3. If you are in half-day kindergarten, you are a 0.5. If you are in full-day tuition-paid kindergarten, you're a 0.5, because the parents are paying the second half of that. As far as the state funding formula, the state's only covering half-day K. So there was a misclassification where students who were paying tuition were categorized as a 1.0 rather than a 0.5. So looking through the data, historically, it pretty much affects all the elementaries commensurately because they were all categorized wrong. So in actuality, where it shows a 73 reduction at Newbury, Rowley at 42, and Salisbury at 28, it's not exactly, but Salisbury is almost even. They're barely down as far as actual, we'll call it bums and seats. Rowley down, more in the teens, and Newbury, add that roughly 28, 30 back in, and that's the real reduction in the number of children showing up to school. Does that make sense? So it makes the numbers look more drastic as far as the reduction, and as far as the calculations, it changes things. The only thing that would have been different is that those numbers would have been reduced 2 years ago. It was corrected with full day K in 14, and then with the 15, the FY 15 or the October 15 count, it was corrected for preschool. So all that does is it has that impact in 1 year. So with that as the scene setter, if we go back to the front page or even the back side of the page, if we look at the front page, let me just point you to those numbers. Right at the top, general operating expenses, $893,879. That's off of the sheet we just looked at. We're seeing a $44,541 reduction in revenues there in the yellow section. So the result of the 893 and the loss of revenue means we have to assess 938,420 to the towns. If you go to the operating assessment box, you can see, because of the swing in assessments or the swing in enrollments, as well as a huge change with the minimum local contributions, Newbury's minimum local contribution went from round figures, from 7.1 million to 6.5 million. They dropped $600,000. Rowley gained $1,500. Rowley stayed almost static. And Salisbury decreased $182,000. So again, because it's actually on the back side of that page, because we use our regional agreement calls for the 2-step formula. We start there at the top with 38,718. We back off 10 million in local revenues. We have to then assess 28,698. So each town pays their minimum. Collectively, that's 21,096,000. That means 7.6 million you see there. That's the amount we're spending in this budget with these cuts. We're spending 7.6 million above minimum. And then the enrollment figures there, you see Newbury is 30.07, Rowley 32.81, and Salisbury 37.12. And then the bottom step there, each town pays their minimum plus their percentage of that 7.6 million, and that's where you arrive at those assessments. So back on the front page, you can see that our operating assessments back at the top are 2.36% as far as an increase. The assessment increase in the aggregate to the towns is a 3.38% increase. However, because we, by the regional agreement, are bound to the 2-step state formula, that means Newbury's assessment goes down an additional $176,856. Rowley goes up 587,606, or 6.75%. And Salisbury goes up 527,670, or 5.22%. So I'll stop there and see if there's any questions. Because again, those figures assume every scenario we just talked about.
So the minimum local, how is effort reduction? You said it was 70% effort reduction?
Yep. So historically, it had been 25%. Last year, my understanding, it was about 40% effort reduction. This year, it's at 70%. But it's a combination of the more effort reduction is factored in, the more clearly the state is saying Newbury is overpaying, so their effort is being reduced. So it's a combination of that factor as well as the changes in enrollments. So even,
Right.
even commensurately, even if you back off 30 roughly from each of those figures, and Salisbury is almost static, Rowley's down, call it 15, and Newbury's down. Newbury's still down double of the other towns. So regardless of the counting methodology, Newbury is shrinking at a much quicker rate than the other two towns. We can do whatever we want to be creative about an assessment formula using the two-step method that implements a 5-year rolling average. But we can't change the minimum local contribution, and that includes enrollment. So if there are any questions about this, there's a couple more pages in this packet, and bear with me as we think outside the box. So the Finance Subcommittee has been looking at the regional agreement. We've been talking for years and years about a 5-year rolling average. Primarily, we've been talking about a 5-year rolling average that, again, would affect that 7.6 million above minimums that we're paying. Another concept that the Finance Subcommittee's talked about, again, we've talked about it historically, is that a regional agreement can stipulate a methodology as creative as we'd like to be. It could literally be Rowley's going to pay the whole bill. And if 3 towns vote it, the commissioner's going to say, sure, why not? Not proposing that, Joe. But so we can create a methodology that works for us as a district, and it's as long as it's approved by the 3 towns. Rather than talking about a 5-year rolling average just for that amount above minimum, part of the discussion has been, okay, we keep saying we don't want the state to be driving this bus. We want it to be based on enrollment. So a methodology, it's used in other regions, is let's take the minimum local contributions out of the equation. Back in '93 when ed reform came about, we had no option because most cities and towns had to make sure they were making their minimum. I forget the figure, 279 of 351 communities across the Commonwealth are more than 20% above minimum. So for us, it's not a factor. We would cut 7.6 million out and still be doing okay as far as assessments. Obviously, we wouldn't be doing okay as a district. So then the theory is, we've talked about, okay, let's look at the budget and say, let's just divide the budget based purely on a 5-year rolling average. It becomes a one-step method. Historically, when we've looked at that, it always creates a huge swing for one of the towns. Most recently, it's been creating a huge swing for Rowley. Middle of the night, a couple weeks ago, I thought, no way, maybe this could align, and this could be the year. If it's already not looking good for Rowley, we have to figure that out. Maybe this is the year we could implement that rolling average. So the second set of papers you have, if I can take you to the very back page, clearly stapled these in the wrong order. This back page now shows you a 5-year rolling average count. So if you look at the bottom, you can see I added in 13, and then there's a 5-year average. So it still shows FY17 numbers as I reported them to you moments ago. But now we have a 5-year average of 848 for Newbury, 872 for Rowley, and 965 for Salisbury. And you can see rather than a 1% reduction, Newbury's actually goes up 0.38%, Rowley down 0.15%, and Salisbury down 0.23% over last year's. Okay? So if we go back one page to that calculation, first section, step one is still the same. $38.7 million offset by $10 million in revenues, 28.7 that we have to assess. I've zeroed out the minimum local contributions. We're not factoring those in at all. We then get to, so that 28, we're just going to divide purely on enrollment. You then see that the step 4, rather than Newbury's average being 30.09, they're 31.6 of the pie. Rowley is 32.47% of the pie, and Salisbury is 35.93% of the pie. Go back one more page. Now you look at that same assessment sheet. Again, all the figures on the top down to that yellow operating assessment box are the same. Rowley, bless you.
Excuse me.
Rowley was at a $587,000 increase. This takes them to a $604,000 increase, a difference of $17,000. I think we could be creative in how we figure out how to deal with that $17,000. But then you can see it shifts a significant increase in Salisbury over to Newbury because, again, this is purely based on enrollment. So to change to that methodology this year, that's obviously not a simple discussion, but if we change to that format this year, we already have a problem that's been identified and is created by what our regional agreement says we have to do. We have no option. We have that methodology. It's the state method. If we implement a different methodology, it would keep Rowley roughly the same, and it would, again, shift funds from Salisbury's costs over to Newbury. So there's a discussion certainly to be had about the impact for this year. But if you go back one page to that calculation again, so go back to where it shows you those assessments, and you see Newbury, where it says step 4, Newbury is 31.6%, okay? So on a 5-year rolling average, Newbury is 31.6%. Actually, you can see that. Actually, if you go straight to the back, the very back of the packet, so you're looking at the percentages based on a 5-year rolling average then. Newbury is 31.6% of the pie, Rowley is 32.47%, and Salisbury is 34.93%. Say again? 35.93%. Apparently I'm saying different numbers tonight, sorry. So again, we have a hiccup this year. We have to solve the hiccup. But then moving forward, if we get, the issue is, I don't know how long this trend is going to continue. So every year this continues, we have to cut to be able to get to an assessment that is within reach for Rowley, while Newbury goes back hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars. So because of the chaos that creates, if we can find a way in implementing this 5-year rolling average would solve that problem. We already have a problem to address this year. Implementing it this year keeps Newbury's assessment ballpark of what it would have been. But what it does moving forward then, so you look at 31.6%. Next year, if Newbury swung another 1% population, on a 5-year rolling average, that's only going to be 0.2% swing. So Newbury could basically assume every $1 million, they're going to be responsible for about 316,000 of it. Rowley's going to be responsible for about 324,000 of it, and Salisbury is responsible for about 359,000 of it. That'll swing by tens of thousands, but it's not going to swing by hundreds and hundreds of thousands. So it's not an easy discussion. I don't know what the appetite would be with the towns, but again, the methodology we use is already creating an issue. So if we have an issue that we could solve moving forward in the methodology keeps Rowley basically at the problem that we have to solve anyway. We have to figure out their higher assessment, and it shifts some of the burden from Salisbury over to Newbury and then provides consistency moving forward. It solves that discussion of the state stays out of it. It's purely on enrollment moving forward. So then the question becomes, can we do that? What happens? So the response from the Department of Ed is that we have to follow our regional agreement protocol. Our protocol, unfortunately, is the state method. So we don't have options. The regional agreement, as I said, can have whatever methodology we want it to have. In order to amend an agreement, you bring it to the three towns vote it unanimously, or all three towns have to vote it, and then the commissioner approves it. The commissioner has never not approved it as long as it's been approved by three towns, unless it's educationally unsound, and that's never happened. So if we did this without it being listed in our agreement, the response from Christine Lynch, who is in the finance department at the Department of Ed, and she is the regional guru, their response would have to be, they didn't follow the regional agreement and they didn't follow state law. And so the question would be, and again, this would be someone who, so say we went with this and then Newbury's paying more than the formula says they should. Someone in Newbury doesn't think they should. They go to the department says, yes, they didn't follow, it's against the law. Their recourse would be to sue the district. Our response would be, and as Christine said, our response would be, well, the way we got this into place was we presented a budget, we voted a budget, all three towns would have to vote and approve this budget. We followed the same process as a regional agreement amendment. And so their thinking is, well, yes, our answer has to be you can't, but you certainly can. So I would certainly propose that if we were going to go down this road between now and March 9th, and that's a long road in a short time, we would propose that as a regional agreement amendment to say we want to talk about other things, but just quick language change, put that with the budget on the floor, we send that language. Again, this is assuming that selectmen, finance committees understand and are behind this concept, and that the three towns all approve it. And just to be clear, your regional agreement can say whatever it wants. Every year it then has to be unanimous vote. Even if your regional agreement says we're dividing by a 5-year rolling average, if it's not the statutory two-step method, it has to be 3 out of 3 towns. The only way it can be a 2/3 if you use the two-step method we have. But again, I think it's safe to say we've always strived to make sure we have all 3 towns supporting it anyway.
Ryan, if we vote an amendment to the regional agreement on the floor of town meeting prior to voting for this year's budget, then who would have a case against the district?
Technically, anyone who wasn't happy. Anyone can sue anyone.
But that,
But a
okay,
solid
but that's
case,
after, that would be after a vote to amend the agreement took place. So the agreement would be amended at the time the vote took place.
Yep. So technically, at the time the vote took place, and again, I'm not a lawyer, but if it's all being done at the same time, could there be a technicality where the budget was approved and then the regional agreement was voted and then it had to go to the commissioner for sign-off before it was really an agreement amendment? So then we would say, okay, we followed the same process. All 3 towns, including the townspeople, voted that this is the best methodology. And according to the Department of Ed, there wouldn't be much of a case there for anyone.
Well, I mean, I think this is something we should probably talk about at the district communication meeting.
Right.
But that doesn't change the numbers at all for tonight, as far as for a tentative budget.
No, it does not. And I just want to remind everybody that this is a discussion, Brian is telling us tonight, but this is a discussion that we will have a week from tomorrow night with the district communications meeting, which is going to be here at 7 o'clock on February 11th. That's when we will have that discussion. Paul?
Ryan, why does the regional agreement have to be voted year to year?
So it's not, I just want to make sure I have that in my calendar. So anything The regional agreement doesn't have to be voted year to year. If we have a budget methodology that isn't the two-step method, it just has to be, that methodology has to be approved unanimously each year. Does that make
Why?
sense? Because it's not the state method. My understanding, that's a new,
The regional agreement couldn't say that we're going to vote this every 5 years.
no, again, you're not changing, you're not revoting the regional agreement. You're just saying, so if our regional agreement passes, we say it's going to be 5-year rolling average. The regional agreement doesn't have to be revoted, but now that budget methodology, that assessment, I should say, methodology, isn't what the state says is their way. So it just means if you're not using the state method, it's not 2 of 3. It just means that all 3 towns have to vote yes on the budget. Which again, for us that's certainly always our goal. I mean, there's obviously no politics, there's no political motive for us to pigeonhole a single town, obviously. So we always strive to get 3 of 3 to support the budget anyway, and historically have. So there's really not any impact. It just, if we use the two-step method, it allows us to move forward with 2 out of the 3 towns supporting it. And again, a town could so basically it allows a town each year to say, nope, we don't like that method this year. We want to vote the regular two-step method. And then,
Just again, a reminder, what our task tonight is, before we leave here, is to give guidance to the administration as to anything that we would like to see in the tentative budget for next week. So, for example, if members of the committee feel strongly that the class sizes should stay below whatever, below 25, if that's something that the committee would like to see in a tentative budget, then that needs to be said now. And so, and again, a reminder, this is a tentative budget. Historically, our tentative budget is a high water mark. Much easier for us to reduce the budget figure than to increase it down the road. So that's what I'm asking tonight. If there are things that anybody on the committee would like to see in a tentative budget, now is the time to say that.
To add, you mean? Or I'm not quite following you.
Yes, I do. For example, the proposal is to remove 2 out of 3 math specialists. Okay, so if anybody in the committee says, well, wait a minute, I really would like to see that in the tentative budget, keyword tentative, then now's the time to say it. If you would like to not see X number of teachers removed at a particular building, then now is the time to say it, because if you want something added back into the budget, now you tell the administration, so it's in the tentative budget.
As a matter of procedure, I also want to be clear about, last year we changed between the tentative and the final, and then we changed again after the final. We couldn't spend new revenues because we still don't know exactly what the revenues will be, although we are fairly sure, but we have to get through the House budget and the Senate and all of that. So what happens that allowed us last year, from the time in March when we voted the final to beginning this school year and being able to put things back in, were because of things we didn't have to spend money on, not because of new revenues.
correct. And the change last year was we didn't have the governors, when we were finalizing a tentative,
He
we
was
didn't
late.
have House 2 because he didn't provide it until the week after.
Mm-hmm.
So we now know the House 2 budget, or H2. Regional transportation, could it go up? Maybe. Yeah, you've sat there as well. I don't think so. I think that's going to be level. Chapter 70, we got the minimum. Maybe they add $5 per pupil. We get another 20 grand. I mean, so we're not talking about a lot of money. Excess and deficiency, we can count on needing to reduce that. The medical, so I think as far as revenues go, we're not going to get a whole lot better. So for us, it's a matter of, we can still change things to say, here's the number, and then if we don't have an expense, that $266,000 for those students, if we were able to build a program in district for 200 and we save 66, well, then we can start talking about something we did cut not cutting. I mean, we don't actually follow through on the cuts, if you will, until the end of the year. So, but just by way of an example, that the $212,000, the 212 and 696 for those 4 elementary teachers, if you add that back in, that takes Newbury from 587 increase to 657, which is from a 6.74% increase to a 7.5% increase. Just that one line.
Linda?
What is our policy for class sizes right now?
Targets.
We have targets.
Yeah. What are those
20 in
targets?
the early years, 22 above that, 23 at the middle school. But they're targets, they're not caps. If I could just share 2 pieces of information. Our senators have drafted a letter to the governor around regional transport, which they've asked me to comment on, so that they're certainly pressing that. And there'll be a lot of opposition to the charter school tuition arrangements, because it will affect a lot of districts to the benefit of a few. So politically, we might see some change in those too.
Just to clarify, the charter is a charge, so if that goes away, that's money we can reallocate and save. Regional transport is a revenue, so that's setting our appropriation, so we couldn't change.
Tina?
In what you've presented tonight, the one thing that I would like to see put back in are the math specialists. I do have great concern about having this be the second year of a new math program and not have that support for the teachers and students.
I was thinking even if it was one more instead of both.
I agree as well. I just think it would be terrible for the ship to stop. Isn't that saying, Mr. Farmer?
That's right.
Paul, I'm sorry.
I'm a little uncomfortable with the middle school foreign language reductions, because it seems as though we're putting something through a budget based on a scheduling system that we don't have worked out. And I don't know if we could make this a new business item, which seems to have disappeared off our agenda.
Well, I disappeared off tonight's agenda, so.
I'm sorry. And so I'm just wondering if in the future, if we could get maybe a briefing from Mr. McRae about the scheduling issue and give us an idea where it's going.
We can report on that. Can I say that we didn't include those 2 things because this is a special meeting,
Right.
and that's why they're not there.
Anything else before next week's tentative budget number vote?
May I just ask a question? Next year at the tentative budget meeting, are we going to also have a budget that shows everything that we are losing as we have done in the past? You know, where
Next
we...
week?
Pardon me?
Next week? You said next year. Do you
Oh,
mean
next week. No.
I prefer
Getting
next-
late, I'm
be great
sorry.
if we could do it next year.
Next week. You know, to show the public of everything that we are losing and how each time we're talking about an adequate budget, and in my opinion, we are nowhere near.
Yep. Next week, we'll have the budget package for you like you're used to seeing. Yeah.
All right, just a reminder, next week we will vote a tentative budget, and on the 24th, we will have the public hearing based on the tentative budget.
Just so I'm clear, that you want us to put the middle school, I've got MS here, middle school, the math specialist back in. I mean, that's the committee saying,
Well, I was thinking at least one more.
Right.
Linda?
I agree that it should be not all 3 of them, but if it's not possible, even if you added 1 or 2 back, that would be
Well,
more
we
beneficial.
We already have one.
Right,
Yeah,
but
two would be
adding,
full back. It would be full again.
I thought we were losing 3.
Losing 2 of 3. We'll still have 1 that would support the 3 elementaries.
Right. I agree with Deb that if we have to compromise, I would be okay with adding one more back.
Anything else other than math specialists in the middle school language?
The middle school language, you like a report?
I would like to have a better idea. You know, we're talking about cutting a program without any real idea of what's going to happen with the schedule. It seems like the schedule we talk about, and I'm still not convinced what the goal is there and what the full benefit is to the school district. I know we talk about using services at the high school and pulling them down to the middle school and vice versa, but I just would like to have a better idea. I mean, like, for instance, is the class size, is the time period for classes in the middle school the same right now as it is in the high school, or you're going to be putting younger students in longer classes? That's one of the questions I'd like to know about.
Yes, we would.
I don't know if, you know,
That
when we have it.
that would be to the benefit of teachers and students.
Larissa?
You know, obviously there's nothing good in this, but one of the things that concerns me, I totally understand about a math specialist, but if we have 26 kids in a classroom, are they even getting the basic math, much less what a specialist would need to bring in to provide further assistance with? I don't know if when you have that many children in a classroom, if you can even get the basic information across. I'd be concerned about that. I mean,
Well, I would just go back to what Dina said earlier, too. I know a lot of times when you look at whether a class can grow or not, it's not just the numbers, but it's the makeup of that class. And so, I mean, my initial question, like Dina's, would be, why are we bumping Newberry's 4th and 5th grade rather than 5th and 6th grade? But that may have something to do, I'm guessing, with the makeup of the class. So it's a little easier to take with 5th and 6th graders. I mean, not that I'd ever want to go back to this, but I think a few years ago when there was some bloodletting, I pulled out class size number from when my kids were at Newberry Elementary School, and my daughter in 3rd grade had 29 kids in a class. It wasn't ideal. She survived, and none of this is ideal, but I don't think 26 in 5th and 6th is horrible. I don't like it, but I think we've gotten accustomed, and thank goodness, to seeing even teens on a page in front of us versus 20-something that
Can I just say, you'd be determining the number of teachers available to the principal. Things will change between March 9th, March 15th, and the start of the school year. So that the principal will actually assign the teachers in the best possible way. We have scheduled a meeting with the leadership Friday morning. We were going to meet on Thursday, but we have the PC now. So we will go over this discussion with them and to get their latest and best thinking on this. And we'll certainly raise that question about grade 4 or 6 at Newbury.
Yeah, I have the same feeling. I think we have to protect the K through 4 grades, and if we're going to make a teacher adjustment or increase class size, it should be in 5th and 6th, not in the younger grades.
Can I just paint a picture? So if I add back in the math specialists and the foreign language teachers, that takes Rowley's assessment to $684,000. So Rowley's then at just shy of 8%. So.
Well, as Deb said, this will be the high water mark. I mean, it's not, I'm looking at Joe, but it's not, it's not that we want to do this, but I think we have to have somewhere to start where we can start making cuts that are unavoidable at this point, I think.
And can I ask, are there other suggestions that you would have as far as places that you would like to see us look at?
Well, it's not going to be popular amongst teachers, but I mean, I know we're looking at the health insurance, but $1 million of this is pay raises. Well, 200,000 is lack of income, a different place to get the money.
Right.
But I think we
650
I think we have to at least ask about I mean, they're due a 2% raise next year. And they're working hard, and I'd love to give it to them, but we're working within an industry that is unusual. When things happen in an industry that we can't see 2 or 3 years out, I think we'd be irresponsible as a committee not to at least bring up the topic to see if they'd consider foregoing not the full 2%, but maybe even 0.5% of that. What does that look like on paper?
Well, I think the figure for steps and COLA for the collective bargaining agreements is in the mid 600,000, call it $650,000. So roughly half is based on steps and roughly half is based on COLA. I mean, there's 57, close to 58,000. That's a 2% for everyone who's not in an association. And then again, close to 200,000 of that is moving existing salaries into the general fund from choice. So
The other way of getting at that is to look at the professional development day that they gave up and then was put back.
That was about 100,000.
That's about 90 to 100,000, yeah.
That's at least a teacher. I mean, I guess it should just be on the table, not completely avoiding the conversation, so.
And I'd like to add, if we're going to do that, I think that should go for
I agree.
it should be reflected in other people's salaries who are not under a contract.
Mm-hmm.
And the converse of that, I don't think the non-contract people should give it up if the contract people don't.
Mm-hmm.
Right, it should
I
go
mean, it
hand
should
in
be
hand.
everybody the same, if that happens.
So what we could do would be to develop a tentative budget with some alternates, to go back to the building analogy for you to look at. I'm not clear whether, as far as world languages at the middle school is concerned, whether we're reporting on the development of the schedule or putting it back in.
I think you want it back in, Paul, with a report, and am I right about that?
I just think we should have a report so that we know what's going on with the situation.
Well, the report won't do any good if they're out,
Well,
right?
So are you asking for both? Are you asking for the report plus reinstatement of the positions?
Well, I think right now, just, yeah,
The report right now?
the report I think is important.
Okay.
Because, this is going on and it's going to have a significant impact on the middle
Okay.
school.
All right.
Just it doesn't have to be long, but just some understanding of what's
Okay.
trying to be done.
I know this is a very, very, very important meeting, but it's also getting very, very late.
Can I
So,
just add one
yeah.
other thing then, Deb, real quickly? The other thing I had in my notes, and I don't know if it was made note of before, but if we don't look at replacing NES's phone service, you said, Brian, that's about 12.5?
call it 12, 13, yep.
Okay.
Oh, yes, I forgot about that.
Yeah, I would
Yes.
like to see that done.
Yep, just one last thing is if the PEC, if when the PNN meets with the PEC, if there's anything that can be done with the design change in the health insurance plan to bring more money back into the district.
Can you repeat that, Paul? I couldn't hear you.
If there's anything that can be done with the design plan changes with the health insurance when you meet with the PEC, if the PNN, because I know that they're in discussions right now.
Right, we're meeting with them tomorrow. Absolutely.
I mean, if you can just keep looking at everything there, because I know it was done before, and we were able to bring a lot more money back into the budget that way. I recall
Yeah,
like 2 or 3 years ago.
They're well aware of it because
Just to
when I...
confirm, that's definitely ongoing.
Right.
Definitely, there will be savings based, certainly, yes, there will be.
You can only get to 0%, but either by some substantial plan design, or changing the share.
And this already assumes a 0. So this doesn't assume the 5% increase we got. This assumes we're getting to 0. Whether we can get below 0, that's another discussion, but this is already assuming there's some progress being made that hasn't been made yet.
Anything else? Deep breath. Could we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? Thank you.
Dina said it, and I was thinking it like heartbreaking.
Unless there's more to be said about
The
setting up
work.
the program
Harder and
for next
harder.
week, if
It does.
given that
Yeah,
there's
that-
It does.
special
Not quite
education
yet a
mandatory,
science
we might be able
Bells where
to
we know
excuse
it.
you.
I think we're making